Welcome to the Momentom Collective podcast. Momentom Collective provides training spaces and community around the world for unconventional minds and nomads to co-create the future. This podcast shares the stories on how we transcend and shift our passions into sustainable ventures. On today's edition, Corey Deacon, co-founder of Neurvana Health. He's a Doctorate of Natural Medicine, neuroscientist, and has mapped and analyzed thousands of brains and specializes in connecting brain and body functioning for optimized health and wellness. Corey will be one of our many great guest teachers at our Digital Nomad Residency in Nicaragua this March through April at Aqua Wellness Center. Visit momentumcollective.com for more info on that. But for now, let's jump into the conversation as we discuss the unconventional concepts around the human brain. Hey everyone, John Early here with the Momentom Collective podcast and a very special guest today, Corey Deacon from Neurvana Health. Corey, thank you for joining us here today.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Excellent. And we're going to jump into a whole bunch of different topics from brain, how the brain works, some alternative health, and as well as how Corey is going to be teaming up with Momentom to be coming down to our Digital Nomad Residency at Aqua Wellness Center in March and April of this year coming up. So we're so excited to have you in house with us. But for now, I guess we'll have to call in from Guatemala up to Canada, there where you are.
Yeah, I'd say I'd probably much rather be where you are, but seeing the sun shining in there, no insulation, a little jealous, I'm not going to lie.
On the day, cold at night. But tell us a little bit about, you're the co-founder and chief science officer of Neurvana Health. You've got a whole list of, achievements behind you. Tell us a little bit about this project and how you got involved with Neurvana Health.
Yeah, so I guess that kind of starts with my story in a way. When I was in university, I started getting a lot of health issues, a lot of brain fog, poor cognition. I was having trouble paying. I always well in school, so it was a new thing for me to all of a sudden absorb what I was reading and what I was listening to. And I of course, like anything, you ignore it, right? What's a doctor going to tell me, right? He's just going to kind of, check my thyroid maybe and send me away. Mm-hmm. So I powered through it for a while. And what ended up happening was I started developing panic attacks. Started getting panic attacks every day. And it got quite bad. I started medicating with alcohol. Ended up in the doctor's office, and just like every other doctor, he'd tell, well, you have anxiety, here's this medication. And that wasn't really good enough for me. I didn't want to just cover up these symptoms of the medication. I wanted somebody to tell me what was going on. Why was this happening? Right? I'd never had these issues before. And I got, so it's just stress, right? I didn't really buy that. So being trained, I was in my master's at the time. So being trained in research really, right, was all I really knew. So I dug into the research, and you start finding, like, now we've compiled a database of 300 different causes for anxiety. You start having more and more, anxiety gets more intense. And so, I started finding all this out, and eventually I landed on something called Neurofeedback, which was being researched at the university I was at. And I don't know if you know much about it. It's essentially a way to talk to the lower parts of the brain. So we have this part of the brain called the limbic system. Most of our memories are stored there. A lot of our intrinsic memories are stored there, which is really interesting. We've found even memories from being in our mom's womb are actually stored in the amygdala in this intrinsic memory center. And it kind of runs the show. It determines whether something is a threat or whether something is safe. And a lot of times you're going to get imbalances within that structure. And it's impossible to look at without something called a quantitative EEG. And that's something that we're hopefully going to be able to set up to bring down to Nicaragua with us as well. It's really like an MRI or a CT, except we're looking at function in the brain. And so I was lucky enough to come across this and, started integrating it into my life. I got trained in neurofeedback. I went and worked at a clinic in Calgary, and that was when I started learning functional medicine. And I thought this was the most brilliant thing, because when I was going through my struggles, conventional medicine to me made no sense, because it wasn't looking at what was causing my issues. It didn't care. It's just, here's the treatment. Everyone with anxiety, here's the first line treatment. If that doesn't work, we try. Natural medicine I found was very similar, where, it was, rather than a drug, it was a herb, right? And we were still just covering up issues, and nobody was really looking at what was causing it. And so into functional medicine, it was kind of like, what I'd been looking for was this form of medicine to causing our, now that I've worked with chronic illness for the last 6 years, shown me that we're doing people, and quantitative EEG and our brain mapping has allowed us to do that by looking at how the brain is functioning, how the nervous system is functioning, and from there we can tell what's actually causing. Because what we see with symptoms like depression, anxiety, panic, fibromyalgia, chronic pain, you can pretty much name any diagnosis in the book, and really it's the tip of the iceberg. It's what we see, but what we don't see is all of the underlying factors that are driving it. So it's a little bit like a garden, right? We don't see what's going on in the soil, but it's really what's going on in the soil is what is going to create the thing that we see, the plant that we see grow out of that. And that's one thing that I'm seeing is where, in conventional medicine nowadays, what we do is we try to just cut the weeds, right? And we try to just nuke the weeds with chemicals, but they always come back because you're not dealing with the soil, right? And then the underlying terrain of what's actually driving it. So that was what brought me to create Neurvana Health. The other thing that I saw and what we do a little bit differently is we do collaborative research. So we actually work with vast amounts of different types of practitioners to try to learn how we all integrate together. Because the other thing that I've seen is a lot of it is conventional or allopathic medicine, which is your, pharmaceutical surgery and drugs is really what it is. It's kind of them versus natural, or it's the medical doctor versus the naturopath versus the chiropractor versus the trauma therapist versus the psychologist, right? And nobody's working together. And it's kind of in the name of vanity or ego, rather than looking at how do we help this person that's sitting in front of me. We're running around going, well, I'm right, you're wrong. So we've partnered with medical doctors, psychologists, chiropractors, and we've collected a whole bunch of data and research. And so our big thing is, even if we can't help somebody, our assessment process allows us to triage people to other practitioners that will be able to help depending on what they're dealing with. So, in some cases there's a massive structural issue that, certain types of chiropractic techniques or yoga can be extremely helpful with. We don't do that in-house, but we have the people in place to refer them to where they need to go for that. So that's a big thing with Neurvana, is we really want to bring back the client or the patient as the hero, and do whatever we need to get them results. So we're just about to trademark something called results-based medicine, which is going to be essentially whatever we need to do to get the results, despite what maybe some research shows and that sort of thing. So that's mainly what Neurvana Health is about.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like a common theme that one of the main issues with modern medicine today is that it treats the symptoms rather than the preventative things. Would you agree that that's one of the main things that isn't working, that you're trying to trim the weeds instead of, deal with the soil, like you were saying?
Absolutely. So we're living in a time where we're trying to put all these symptoms into different boxes, and doesn't work. It used to work when the system was developed, in the early 1900s. it worked really well as an acute care system, right? So if I have blood poisoning, I want to be in a hospital with some IV antibiotics, right? If I'm in a car accident, I want to be in a hospital getting put back together. But what we've tried to do is we've tried to use this acute care system and transfer it into chronic care. And it hasn't worked, right? And obviously we look at the numbers, they're staggering on chronic illness. It's just shot up since the 1970s, 1980s. I mean, we're looking at a time in developed worlds where 1 in 2 people are going to have cancer by 2030. Right? One in 8 people are experiencing autoimmune disease. 1 in 40 autistic children. Used to be 1 in 500, used to be non-existent, right? So when I look at these types of numbers, I go, okay, well, what were we doing way back when that we're not doing now, right? What are we missing? We're obviously missing a huge piece, and obviously what we're doing is not working. I show a diagram, and maybe I can pull it up here. Actually, I might be able to share my screen of what I call conventional medicine effectiveness. The top 10 prescribed drugs in the United States in 2016. Out of those top 10, the best performing drugs were working for 25% of people. Wow. Right? And when we look at placebo effect studies, there's a lot of placebo effect studies that placebo effect performs 25%. Right? So yeah, we really have to think about what we're doing here. We're doing the same thing over and over again. I call that insanity. Like, oh, let's try to find this other fancy drug, right? It's like this other fancy weed cutter or this other fancy weed killer.
Expensive weed killer. Let's not forget how expensive some of these things are.
Totally, right? So if you're not looking at what's actually causing issues, a lot of medications, they were meant to be taken short term. Right. And I think that's the benefits of conventional medicine, is that the medications can work really well to stabilize people, right? So, you have somebody who is going through panic disorder. It's tough to do emotional processing when you're in panic all the time, right? So we can get some drugs introduced to the system to calm it while we work on things, right? Another good example, proton pump inhibitors that people are on for heartburn. They were meant to be on for a week. That was how they were originally meant to be used, was you go on it for a week while we figure out what's going on, while we change your diet. I had a guy who came in, saw a guy yesterday. He'd been on it for 30 years. Wow. A drug that was meant to be on for 7 days, right? So there's just, there's no follow-up. We're trying to treat chronic issues in the way that we treat acute issues, and it's obviously not working, right? So so for us, we're about taking things a lot deeper and helping people find, what is actually causing your issues, and helping people understand that we need to think differently about these types of things, because drugs aren't working.
Yeah.
So
I'd heard from some other cultures in Eastern medicine that they would, you'd pay your doctor when you're feeling well, and you'd stop paying him when you weren't feeling well.
I've heard that too. I think that would be an amazing system.
And I feel like we're kind of in reverse now. And I'm curious, when you're, working in the medical profession and that industry, do you feel that there's that pressure to keep people needing to be on medications to keep the money coming in for big pharma? It seems like a big scary word these days, is big pharma, and having people on consistent medications and prescriptions.
Yeah, it's a great point. We have set our system up a little backwards for that. It is about this continued care drug model. I mean, how do you make money? Do you make money by keeping people taking something that they can't get anywhere else continually, right? It's really our system's a bit of a mess, to be honest, because I know a lot of medical doctors. I'm good friends with a lot of medical doctors. I get along with them. We see eye to eye. The problem is they live in a constant state of fear, that the wrath of the medical association is going to come down on them if they don't follow protocol. Right. So what I've seen a lot is, again, the natural versus pharmaceutical thing. We're not using it properly. I find conventional medicine can be very useful, but what's happened with everyone has such a bad taste in their mouth that now they don't even want to go see their doctor. They don't want to work with their doctor because they found their doctor's not there to work for them. Their doctor's there to work for the medical association. And I mean, these guys, they're answering to administrative staff that haven't had a single course in medicine. They don't know what it's like to try to treat a patient and to try to help somebody get better. A lot of times they just have to follow protocol. We run into this all the time with cancer. We have some pretty cool access to some pretty cool tests that increase cancer outcomes huge, and we struggle because we can't get an oncologist to prescribe an off-label drug. They need to be approved for certain types of cancer, and a lot of them won't budge because they are so afraid of losing their license or being sued.
Right.
So, it's a lot of doctors care and they want to do more, but they can't. They're handcuffed. So a big thing we like to teach people is learning as much about your health and about what you can do for yourself as possible, because nobody's out there to look after us. We've really been told a lie, that lie being that we're going to be taken care of and that medicine's getting better. And, I saw an article the other day published in Nature Reviews, really, really highly respected journal, a 27% decrease in the death rate in cancer. But the problem is cancer's shot through 300% increase. So, okay, yeah, less people are dying, but way more people are getting it. So, I always say that preventative, you can't beat preventative. If you can find someone like myself to work preventatively, that's huge. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But again, another problem in our culture is we've been taught that pain is a metric of health. So if you're not in pain, if you're not having symptoms, if you're not having issues, then you're 100% healthy, and it's just not true. You're really just waiting for the lid to blow off the top. Everybody's having underlying issues and underlying things they can optimize. But again, we've been told, and if we try to go see our doctor for preventative, they kick you out of their office. They don't do that, right? So yeah, I think we're facing a big problem, and I think the way out of it is educating people on the reality of what's actually going on.
Yeah, I'd like to jump into more about the brain. You're talking neurofeedback, discussing the lower parts of the brain. And there's different aspects of the brain that have evolved more than others. And you're talking about the fight or flight mode. I mean, that's a very old part of the brain that saved us from saber-toothed tigers and these things in the past. So are we still fighting some of these aspects in the brain that are, very old parts of our evolved physical body and our brain system?
Yeah, absolutely. So humans are an interesting species because we're one of the few species that can put ourselves into a fight or flight state through thought alone. Right? Most species can't do that. They definitely can't do it as efficiently as we can. So we have this system in our I was talking about this system, the limbic system, right? So we had lower reptilian regions evolve. Then we had this limbic system evolve, and that was when we started to become social creatures. And really, what it is it's a social survival system. And if you look back in evolution, we started hanging out in groups, not quite like it is today. If we got kicked out of the group, we're in big trouble, right? So there was a whole emotional social survival system that's still there and still affecting us. Traumatic experiences prime that system, and it causes us to make decisions out of fear rather than decisions out of logic. And really what I think, again, within our culture particularly, is marketers have known this for a long time, and a lot of us don't realize we're being marketed almost every second of every day. I mean, you're scrolling social media, you are constantly being marketed, and marketing works best when it makes people feel like something's missing, or it creates fear. So we have this part of our brain that's job is to look for threats.
Right.
So, everything that we see, that we smell, that we taste, that we hear, and that we feel in our body is relayed up through this system, and that system puts a tag on it as being dangerous or safe. It happens before we're even cognitive that we've been exposed to a stimulus. So if I flash a word on a computer, and we do assessments like this in our field called gamma asymmetry assessments, we can flash a word and we can tell what that limbic system is detecting, whether it's detecting danger or whether it's detecting safety, based on the burst in the left and the right hemisphere in the frontal lobe. And so the really crazy thing that's happening in our brains a lot of the time is we're actually making judgments before we even realize we're doing it, and then we rationalize the judgment. So a lot of us think we're actually acting logically, but we're just rationalizing a preconceived judgment from this lower subconscious region of the brain that's trying. Its job is to try to keep us safe, but it's not logical. So we don't have good access to it to be able to go, okay, well, this isn't actually a threat, so we can calm down now. And you'll see this in PTSD. People know that they're not in the moment, but their brain is completely hijacking them based on old memories. Childhood trauma studies show this. The adverse childhood experience study, the more traumatic experiences one has as they're developing and that system develops, the higher risk they have of every disease. It's not even just mental health. They have higher risk of cancer, higher risk of autoimmune disease, higher risk of inflammatory bowel disease, because of the effect on the immune system. So it's a really powerful system, that you're 100% right. We haven't learned how to decouple ourselves from it very well. It requires a lot of personal work and a lot of learning about ourselves, which most people don't do.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what Momentum Collective is all about, is doing that personal work to get past these blocks of our unevolved selves. But I did find it really interesting that you brought up through the evolution, and how much has changed in the brain through being social creatures. I've just been reading this book, The Meaning of Human Existence, with Edward Wilson, and he talks a lot about how the reason why our brains grew so quickly, faster than any other neurological part of biology in the history of life, is through community and through being social creatures and creating these past, present, future, when we're needing to create these circumstances of judging, if I don't do this, how will this person react to me? And then will I still get some food or shelter from this transaction? And we're having to create these realities and these situations. And that made our brain have to blow up in different ways to rationalize and bring this past, present, future. And like you said, bring this way to rationalize these decisions all the time in a social setting, and create that fight or flight just from a mental thought. And it's interesting that that's what's caused us to evolve, and that's what's caused us to create this reality that we're living in, this mental, this amazing brain. But now it's also our downfall for, being stuck in the same thing that kind of created us to begin with.
Totally.
So I'd like to go a bit more into that whole thing of that, how much of our health is based on our perception and is based on our own thought patterns, because I see your tagline here, you don't accept it's all in your head as a diagnosis, and neither do we. So I'm curious as to how much of things is in our own head and is placebo through our own perception, and how much is a real physical thing going on that needs to be treated.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna share an image, actually, because I think it'd be helpful, because what I developed a model over the years of just learning about, different stressors on the system. And, we used to think that there's so much of this, physical, biochemical, hormonal, immune system related stuff. And that's what we've been trying to target. And over the years, I've actually expanded the model to be that the highest effect level is actually the emotional limbic level. Slowly has gotten, that's where I've seen more and more is that is the strongest level, is what are the decisions, because we're not making our decisions. Most of the decisions that are made in our brain are made subconsciously, which a lot of people don't realize. We're in awareness. We have the ability to be aware of what's going on. But anybody with, for instance, depression will tell you they can be aware of it all day, but they can't change it. Why can't they change it? Well, we don't have access to most of our brain to be able to shift that. So I always show people this, because what we thought, as toxicities and heavy metals and infections and all this stuff, I mean, these all have a toll on the stress system. And if this tank overflows, that's where we get our clinical conditions, right? But what I've seen is actually within the limbic system, what happens is our limbic system's making decisions on whether things are threatening or not. So if I get an exposure to a toxicity, it's way worse if my limbic system freaks out and mounts a danger response. That shifts my immune system out of whack. It shifts my hormonal cascade out of whack, causing my gut to shut down. I don't absorb anything anymore. And this is some brilliant research from Dr. Stephen Porges, who's a neuroscientist, called polyvagal theory. And this is what happens in our day-to-day. What we'd like to see is bouncing between something called the fight or flight and the rest and digest. And this is also social engagement. But what happens when we have too many of these stressors and our brain starts acting like things are dangerous everywhere, this starts activating. And if we're activated for too long, it's the way I describe this is if you can imagine a gazelle out in the wild, eating grass, socially engaged. All of a sudden, a group of lions jumps out, right? What happens? You go into flight. You do that until you get caught. And if you get caught, your body actually has this other stress response called freeze, or play dead, right? We want to hey, let's play dead. I hope I get out of this, right? And we'll move through all this anxiety, panic, fear, and everything like that. Sometimes we'll be angry, irritated, and frustrated. And eventually we'll move into the shutdown, right? People who feel like they need to commit suicide or even have suicidal ideations, it's actually the brain preparing you for death. Isn't that fascinating? We're not even in a survival situation, yet our brain's perceptions can take us all the way through this to literally a state of I want to die without any actual true survival situation going on. It's so fascinating how our brain reacts to that. And it does really, all this stuff that happens is happening based on old memories. So our emotional system can only access old memories. So when we get really emotional and fired up, and I call it triggered, right? If somebody else triggers us, it's actually based on an older memory that we haven't resolved yet, right? Mm-hmm. And by not resolving anything like that, or bringing conscious awareness to it, we stay stuck in this. And it's a really, really interesting process. The other cool part about it is you can, by working through whatever is causing the perceptions in your brain to make the decisions they're making, you can shift it to actually bring yourself out of these states and come back down into a nice social engagement, ventral vagal, rest and digest. And I mean, you see all sorts of stories and accounts of people being sent away from treatment because their cancer is so severe, they're given 4 weeks to live. They work on their stress response. They take up yoga, and all of a sudden it's enough. to actually shift them to a point of healing. This is where the body heals.
Right.
And so what we do with people, and I understand it's similar to what you guys do, is we just help people get back here, because the body heals. We just need to get it in that state to heal.
Right.
So it's pretty fascinating. I mean, I've seen things, conditions that you're not supposed to get better from, like ALS. I've seen two accounts of ALS be reversed by just utilizing this process and clearing out stressors out of the system. So it's interesting work to be involved in.
Definitely. And you were mentioning yoga and the benefits of that. And I mean, the basis of yoga is meditation and just breath. And I think, is that not one of the most powerful medicines of just being able to breathe slowly and mindfully with intention? Because it's hard for your body to be in fight or flight mode if it's breathing slowly and in a relaxed state. Yeah. So what are some other things that you find are simple but so super effective at keeping us out of this stress state, this fight or flight state?
That's absolutely essential. Breath is the only way that we can actually access or calm those areas of our brain. And this is measurable. Like this isn't, just me speculating. This has actually been measured in neuroscience journals and that sort of thing, been published. We actually have access to those areas, but only through breath. Mm-hmm. And it's one thing we forget about, right? How long can we go without food? A while, 30 days, usually more for the most part, where most of us are quite well fed. Water, a week. Air, 3 minutes, right? 3 minutes we have without breath. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. And you measure the functional changes of the brain when somebody's doing a relaxed diaphragmatic, deep diaphragm breath. And it's so cool to see the shift that happens, right? Mm-hmm. That's my favorite. The other thing that happens with that is you can bring a level of awareness. And what yoga therapy does is you start accessing, the body will actually hold, the muscular systems will actually hold old memories and old trauma. The eye position will also do it. So with yoga, you're actually accessing some of the old, excuse my language, but some of the old shit that your brain's holding on to. And you're able to bring it up and clear it. And then for anybody who's practiced yoga, all sorts of emotions come up in it. I know the last yoga I did, I was getting frustrated, and we were doing, I can't remember the name. I'm not a yoga expert. I can't remember the exact pose we were doing, but I got into it and right away I could feel myself going, this is stupid. Like what? This teacher is making it way too hard, right? And all this stuff starts coming up and I go, oh, whoa, that's interesting, right? What's all that stuff that's coming up, right? Yeah. And I think that's so powerful when we can redirect from thinking that our external environment is the problem, and we can redirect back to, okay, what does this mean for me? Why am I feeling these feelings come up, right? And can give you really, really deep insights. And I know as I've done work, I always used to have a lot of anger and that sort of thing come up, and have found that as a large cause of my anxiety back in the day, was holding my anger in. All my energy was going to that. And, I eventually worked through to the deeper parts of why I was actually angry. It took a lot of work, but all of a sudden when that came to conscious awareness, it's like, boom, I knew why I was angry and why certain things irritated me. And it was just like, it released. Right. And so it's a lot of introspection and learning about yourself, for sure. And I honestly think that, you look at the state of the world, I think that's our biggest problem, is we're all running around wounded, and we're not dealing with our own wounds. And as a great quote, and I was trying to find the guy that said the quote, because I can't seem to find it, and maybe you've heard it before, but it's until you make the unconscious conscious, it will control your life and you will call it fate.
Right.
And Some people speculate that it was Carl Jung that said that. I haven't been able to find any clarity, but I just think that's amazing, right? Like, until you make all that unconscious stuff conscious,
Right.
it controls your life through your perceptions, through your decisions, and you call it fate, right? Oh, it was bound to happen, right?
Right.
And we dissociate from the fact that we had any control over it. And the opposite is true. We had all the control. We just didn't do the work, right?
That's really interesting. And I know you'd mentioned, with neurofeedback, able to see these memories that go back from even being in the womb. Can things go back further than that? Do you believe in, whether it's past lives or even just that the body holds on to, succession of genes through maybe some trauma that happened through, being passed down the line?
Patterns. So the way that our genes are expressed or turned on and off is through a process called acetylation and methylation. And that's really what takes us, by the way, from health to disease to health, or health to disease. Is it's not our genes and the fact that they're, we might have bad genes or good genes. It's actually the genes that are turned on and off, and the way that those genes are expressing themselves that changes it. And the best way I can describe that is a caterpillar turns into a butterfly, never changing its DNA. Its DNA stays the exact same. We could run a DNA test and we're gonna match it to the caterpillar and the butterfly.
Some of the memories you're kept
what change?
What I've read.
Yeah, exactly. So what changes is the genes that are turned on and off. And so what we've seen is Holocaust survivors. 3 generations following the Holocaust, we're seeing differential methylation patterns in genetics. And one of the reasons we believe this happens is this limbic system we keep talking so much about is actually being affected while we're in our mom's womb. So 3rd trimester is when it's coming online. And so it's actually encoding fear-based biochemical signals. And we may see it maybe even on a higher level. It's just something that's hard to measure. But we can see the biochemical signals change the development of that system. So now that system is more prone to being in danger mode all the time. And then that generation gets pregnant, same thing happens, right? And so we see this we call it inherited family trauma. There's a colleague of mine, quite good friends with, Mark Woolen. He just wrote a book on inherited family trauma. It's absolutely brilliant. And so, these are the types of things too that we can dig out of us. We learn enough about, where we came from, and we can start separating out the stuff that's not ours. Because a lot of us have, and this held true for me, I had a lot of stuff that wasn't even mine, right? It was my mom's anxiety from a miscarriage that she had that almost killed her before she got pregnant with me, right? A lot of it was just that. So I'm absolutely, there's some stuff that, past life, related stuff, I don't know if we're ever going to be able to bring that into the literature and the research, because it's so hard. At this point, impossible to measure, but you have these types of experiences where they're actually measurable, looking at intergenerational trauma. That's extremely powerful. Right? Because now all of a sudden, whoa, okay, this stuff's not mine, right? Now I can start moving through this. I can start working through it. And again, it just brings another higher level of understanding to what we can learn about ourselves. And then we start becoming aware as things are happening to us, instead of acting out of fear and that sort of thing. And I would like to show this diagram too, if that's okay, if I share my screen again. Close that. This is where we start. And everybody has some sort of trauma. some sort of wounding that happens, and we fluctuate through what we call conscious imperfection, with the goal being, here, conscious perfection. I essentially just call this perfect awareness. Being so, knowing so much about ourselves that our level of awareness keeps us in this conscious perfection. If we get there, your danger response can't even really turn on, because you've kind of worked with all those intrinsic memories that sit back here in the unconscious. And this is, moving towards the soul, which I never thought, being a scientist, I'd be talking about the soul. But it's, you read some of the old literature and everything, and that, soul, or the daemon or demon, is taken out of context for sure in our culture. But this is what we're all doing, whether we like it or not. We're all moving towards this. And, I see midlife here. People call it midlife crisis. Psychologist that I like the work of calls it the middle passage. It's just a passage that we go through. So that's what we're doing. We're working with people. We're trying to get them to understand and move through this in a smooth fashion, and just help them learn more about what's actually going on underlying within their systems.
Mm-hmm. So working with the brain a lot, I mean, there's a lot of frequencies and vibrations happening there. I'm curious about some of that, because here in our artist residency here in Guatemala, we've got Jessa, a good friend, who's been working with the AMP coil, the PEMF. I believe you've been working with one as well.
Yeah, we have one in clinic, not the same one. But yeah, we use EMF, pulsed EMFs. I mean, that's another topic, is this invisible toxicology of EMF radiation, from cell phones, Wi-Fi, right? So these EMFs are becoming really useful because they're helping balance that out. The toxicology reports on Wi-Fi, 3G, 4G, LTE, and Bluetooth just got published in May, and then peer-reviewed and released in November. And it was the National Institute of Health that did the study. You really don't argue with them. They do incredible research. They're the most funded research institute on health in the world. They found a 17-year study, huge rates of cancer in the animal groups that were exposed to this unhealthy radiation, right? These RFs. And so EMF is an amazing way to actually help counteract that. And our cells actually communicate through light. And this is another thing we're starting to kind of jump a level up, because we've realized, like, trying to use chemicals is way too low of a level. We don't get a good enough effect. But sunlight, full spectrum light, EMFs, right? These are all light therapies. They actually provide information within this cell signaling system, which is really interesting, because you would need thousands of chemicals all in perfect concentration to even attempt to mimic that. So I mean, that, we're starting to prescribe things like going out in light, it's completely disrobed, going out in sunlight, getting full spectrum, right? Especially in North America, as you're in a great place right now for that. For us, it's like right now it's dark at 4:30, and it's not light until 8:30 the next morning. We're getting bombarded by fluorescent lights, blue spectrum lights from poor quality LCD screens, and it's just an absolute mess, what's happening with our hormone system because of it. So we've seen a really good effect with pulsed EMS in healing, reducing inflammation, and getting those cell signaling systems balanced back out.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm curious. I mean, here at Momentum, we also do obviously a lot of movement and a lot of peak performance with circus arts, with flow artists. I'm curious to hear a bit of your definition of what is a flow state, especially from, a brain, from the perspective of the brain. What does it mean to be in that peak performance, that flow state?
Yeah, I mean, those types of states, I haven't looked much, and we haven't done research much on it with our technologies, but we do know that in those states like that, especially if it's a challenging flow state, you're incredibly mindful is what happens, right? You create this high level mindfulness, which again, we're decoupling from that reactivity to fear or danger response. Because like you said, right, if you're connecting all of your conscious awareness to breath, it's hard for you to connect to anything that might be threatening, right? And so these are just higher level mindful states that are more translated into the real day to day, right? Because if we can't translate something into real day to day, then, you know, again, we've kind of done people a disservice. So those types of exercises, you create an incredibly high level of mindfulness because it is, you know, they're challenging, right? So that's one of the benefits of that. I mean, movement, sweat response, right? All these things are incredibly, look at the literature. There's lots of research on it, incredibly healthy activities everybody should be doing.
Yeah. Speaking of breathing and breath, we've got a breathwork class happening just down below me. So I apologize if that sound is coming through and you can hear some of that, but we've
no, actually I can't hear it at all. That's great though.
Yeah, no shortage of workshops and things, and I'm excited.
Right on.
House with us and work on some breath work and some other talks just like this in Nicaragua at Aqua, at our Digital Nomad Residency, with a bit more focus on topics like this and work performance and different things like that. So, have you been to Nicaragua before?
Yeah, we have actually. We did a Central America trip. My wife and I, my sister and a few friends, 2013. Went through down to Belize and all the way down to Costa Rica. So yeah, we spent about 3 weeks actually in Lago de Atlan and learned Spanish. Well, a little bit of Spanish anyway.
Perfecto. Podemos practicar. We can practice your Spanish.
Yeah, there you go.
Excellent. Well, I've just got a couple more questions before we wrap up this podcast. But, you know, I'm curious on your end, like, what do you do to stimulate your brain and your mind to kind of turn on that, either the flow state or your optimal health kind of zone?
Yeah, I mean, a few things. Diaphragmatic breathing, activities to sweat is incredibly. We're looking now and comparing the literature on exercise versus simply sweating, right? Sweat lodge style. And we're seeing we think a lot of the benefits coming from exercise are because of the sweat response.
Interesting.
So yeah, sweating, exercise, diet is huge for me. Nutrition, you know, as soon as I stray from what I know my optimum nutrition plan is, you know, you start feeling a little less than optimal. So, I mean, that's a big one for me. And then connecting to my purpose is, I would say, the biggest thing that keeps my brain healthy. Of course, I'm always brain mapping and I'm keeping up with what my brain's doing and making sure I'm preventing anything. But connecting to purpose has been huge for me. And for me, my purpose is helping educate, you know, the world in what our brains are doing and helping people learn more about themselves so they can live healthy, happy lives. And at the same time, just helping guide people to that inner healer that's within everybody. That brings me, I mean, it keeps my brain tip top, just connecting to that purpose and doing, you know, that's, for me, that is at this point in time, my entire purpose. So, being able to connect with that, I find just, it always keeps me going, always keeps me excited, always keeps my brain sharp. So I'm always learning, always reading so that I can just help bring more of that to the world. So
thank you so much. And I think that's just it. It's, you know, is finding that what excites people, what excites them to help each other. And also the realization that, like you were saying, we can heal ourselves. We don't have to have this external help all the time or medication. Is that our body has these tools built in for peak and optimal health. So I think we often forget that, and we just need some little reminders to kind of keep us breathing slow, living with intention, eating well, and living in a community that keeps the vibration high and that energy. So.
Yeah. And, you look at some of the research in, the blue zones of the world, Ecuador, that sort of thing, the sense of community and the environment, it's amazing. What can be said about health in those areas. And it's something, from where I am right now, you see a lot less of. I know where you are right now is complete opposite of what I'm immersed in. But yeah, I think it's something we need to really bring back, away from this whole individualization and back towards the collective community, because we all have, whether we know it or not, we all have something to bring to the world. And if we can bring it with purpose, I think that's one of the best healers that there is.
Beautiful. Well, we're so excited to have you in our community at our Digital Nomad Residency in Nicaragua. March and April, we're there for a month, and at Aqua Wellness Resort. And we're just really excited to have you in-house and continue these conversations, and also to hear more and sweat with you too. Obviously, we'll get a sweat on down there. So
looking forward to it.
Perfect. Where can people find some more information about yourself and about Neurvana Health?
Yeah, so best way to get some info is on our website, www.neurvanahealth.com. And actually, if anybody's interested in talking to a trained health advisor, or actually having a 30-minute consult over the phone, talking about if they have any specific questions or specific problems they want to address, knowing whether we can help them, or maybe if we have a recommendation where else they could go, they can go www.neurvanahealth.com/go. And that brings our calendar up, and people can book for a 30-minute consult to chat with us as well.
Excellent. And that's Neurvana, N-E-U-R.
You got it. Neurvana. Yeah. Beautiful. So I can send you that off, and we can put it in the link as well.
Sounds good, Corey. Thank you so much for taking the time today to speak with us, and we look forward to having you in-house with us in Central America.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to it. Thanks a lot, Johnny.
Cheers, Corey.